Today we're talking about human missing links. Everything's been leading up to this. By way of review, which one is real science? The data or the evidence must conform to the theory. If it does not, just ignore the data or the evidence? No, that's not real science. Or the theory must conform to the data. If it does not, adjust or abandon the theory. Yes, that is real science. We have already made mention that both creation and evolution, because they happened in the past, are not observable, testable, repeatable, or falsifiable. But we can confirm it with the facts. And so we come back to the same statement I've made since the beginning. Both evolution and creation are religious beliefs, but which one fits the data best? And we've been approaching this from a scientific point of view, looking at the evidence and seeing that creation fits the data best. I want to review also the term simplistic. Simplistic is not the same as simple, not for things that are easy to understand or deal with or use. Those things are just simple. But simplistic refers to when a subject is presented too simply, misleadingly so, or glosses over or omits relevant facts, or presents trite, hackneyed, or slogan-like statements, then that is being simplistic. And unfortunately, that's what the evolutionary side has been doing. Now let's look at some DNA and some of the claims. We have reviewed in a previous video that DNA is made up of base pairs, which would correspond to letters. It has codons, which would correspond in our language to words. It has genes, which would correspond in our language to paragraphs. And it has chromosomes, which would correspond in our language to chapters. There have been claims made about the DNA of humans that are frankly not true, but let's examine them. One of those claims is that 98% of human DNA matches the DNA of chimps. This claim was first made in 1975 before the human genome science had really taken off, and it has been persistently repeated in spite of subsequent evidence to the contrary. More recent estimates are more accurate and way lower. But even so, let's look at this. The part of the DNA that they're referring to is just 2% of the human DNA. And that 2% of the human DNA is what is used for giving the formulas for how to make proteins. Now, there's a lot more to human DNA than just that, but that's the part they're comparing with chimps and making that claim that it's 98% the same as chimp DNA. But why would anybody assume that humans would have different proteins than chimps? We have different organs, different bones, different appearance, but why would anybody claim that they should have the same proteins? But that's what they're actually referring to in that claim. If we actually look at the rest of the DNA, there's a huge volume of information there to tell the body how to create each one of the organs, to how to create the body during gestation, to how to fight disease, to how to repair DNA. There's just a massive amount of information there that's not even being considered. But even if you want to accept the premise of 98% of human DNA matching chimp DNA, which is not true, then look at this. 80% of human DNA matches mouse DNA. 60% of human DNA matches banana DNA. And 42% of human DNA matches fruit fly DNA. So what does that prove? It actually doesn't prove much of anything. But you still see this claim being made. We said that 2% of the DNA is what they were talking about. That's the 2% that's used for making proteins. The remaining 98% for decades was considered junk DNA, meaning that it was stuff that was left over from human evolution and had no current purpose in the body until the ENCODE project was started. And that was researching all the rest of the DNA and seeing what does it actually do? And they have found hundreds of thousands of functions in this other DNA that was claimed junk, had no purpose. The evolutionary assumptions held back science for decades, and nobody bothered to research the other 98% of the DNA, which is really unfortunate because there's a lot of important things that they have found and are continuing to find in it. And what they're finding is that it's not junk. It's absolutely vital and it's really important. And our understanding of it is really helping us with a lot of health issues. So again, referring back to it, that claim about the 98% of the human DNA was only referring to the 2% of the DNA that actually encodes for proteins and not the whole genome. And here's a quote from Professor John Maddock of Genomics England, which is a company that is built on using human DNA for betterment of humanity. The failure to recognize the implications of the non-coding DNA will go down as the biggest mistake in the history of molecular biology. So evolutionary concepts actually held back science for decades. So which is more credible? 98% of the 2% of human DNA for protein encoding matches chimp DNA, 92% matches mice, 50% matches bananas, 42% matches fruit flies, proving evolution, or similarity of protein encoding human DNA matching that of chimpanzees proves similarity of proteins only, ignoring the 98% of the human genome. Let's talk about vestigial organs. Vestigial organs are body parts that are claimed to have no current purpose, that are presumed remnants of former evolutionary stages. So in the human body, all of these organs, the pineal gland, the ear muscles, tonsils, thymus gland, nipples in males, appendix, and the tailbone were all claimed to be vestigial organs having no current purpose. They have since found to indeed have purpose. For instance, the tonsils, when I was a kid, they were thought to be of no purpose, and why not just have them taken out so that in case they get infected later on, you won't have to worry about that. And now they have found that tonsils are the body's first line of defense against ingested or airborne pathogens. Pretty important organs, actually. The appendix, for a while, they were saying, well, let's just get rid of people's appendix because it doesn't serve any purpose anyway. But now they understand that it's important in protecting the intestine from harmful bacteria that happen to inhabit that part of the intestine. So it's very important in human immune responses. And the thymus gland, which is in our chests, it was thought to be vestigial because they didn't know what it did. And now they since have found out it's very important to support the human immune system. That's where the T cells that are created in the bone marrow get matured and are able then to go around and scout for things that don't belong in our bloodstream and get rid of them. Rather than vestigial organs being truly vestigial and not having a current purpose, in other words, having been leftovers from evolution, they are now recognized as being all of them important in human function. So which is more credible? Humans have organs that are leftovers from previous evolutionary stages and have no current use, or organs previously viewed as vestigial in humans have all some purpose and are not leftovers after all. Let's talk about embryonic evolution. Different stages in human embryonic development were claimed in the past to reflect human evolutionary stages. This is one of the images that they use to prove that. So you've got an embryo of a fish, a salamander, a tortoise, a chicken, a rabbit, and a human. And at this stage, they look pretty much the same. So people were saying, see, that proves, we all evolved. But if you look at them shortly before the birth, well, no, nobody would say they look the same. We would say, yeah, that one is definitely a fish, and that one's a salamander. It's got little legs. And there's the tortoise. We can see that. And there's the chick. and there's a rabbit, and there's a human, and they're all different. Well, if you go backwards a little bit from this point, you see they are starting to look a little more the same. And this is the illustration I showed you at the beginning, in which they look very much the same. But you know when they look exactly the same? Right after fertilization, when they're just one big cell. They look exactly the same. So what does that prove? Really, nothing. At one point in human embryo development, there is what looks like a tail. And evolutionists have tried to use that to claim that this shows that we descended from ape-like ancestors in the past that had tails. Well, it's not really a tail, it's just the spine that has been completed because the spine's pretty important, you know? It's so important that it needs to be completed before other things like eyes and arms and legs and even other organs are completed. It's kind of the scaffold upon which the rest of the human body is built. So that claim actually doesn't hold up either. And it's just foolishness, really. So which is more credible? Prenatal features that look like tails prove humans evolved from less evolved creatures? Or prenatal tails are just the spine finished first because it is needed before limbs or other body features? Have human missing links in human evolution really been found? You'll see in textbooks and sometimes in the media images like this with skulls that are from different creatures and ending up with humans at the bottom right. When you initially look at them, it looks like there could be some progression between them. So let's actually look and see what's going on here with some of these claims of missing links for humans. One of the first claims of a missing link for human was the Piltdown man. It was a partial cranium, that's the main part of the skull, and a partial jawbone. It was accepted as a legitimate find for decades. But then when they actually tested it, they found out that the cranium was indeed human from the medieval era. So it was an old skull somebody had dug up. And the jaw was actually an orangutan jawbone that was a few hundred years old. And the teeth were filed down deliberately to make them resemble human teeth. And then a key part of the jaw that would have given it away as being not human was actually taken off. The bottom line is it was a deliberate hoax. And yet it took 41 years to prove it that, which means that evolutionists were so anxious to have a missing link that they just accepted it with open arms without scientific scrutiny and were left being very embarrassed in the end. Here's another one. The Nebraska Man was discovered in 1917. The whole premise of the Nebraska Man was built from the finding of one single tooth. And that's the tooth that they found. And after 10 years, it was discovered that the tooth wasn't even human, it was a pig tooth. Building up this whole missing link of humans. But notice the illustration. I mean, that looks pretty real, doesn't it? And we'll talk about the whole idea of illustrations and reconstructing faces and heads from skeletons. We'll talk about that in a minute. How anxious to prove themselves right that they will accept this, which really doesn't hold up at all. It's really sad. Now, most people in this day and age have heard of Lucy, and Lucy was claimed to be an ancient ancestor of humans. It was discovered in 1934. It was dated to about 3.8 million years ago, and it was about 3.7 feet tall, so not very tall. It was thought to be bipedal, and that was important because this was showing that it was a human ancestor. Bipedal meaning that it walked upright and was therefore more related to humans. Well, since then, they have found out that it was not bipedal, it was a tree dweller, and it has been reclassified as Australopithecus, which means definitely in the ape family. And now it's not considered a human ancestor, but you still hear it in the media and in textbooks. So here we got these first three, the Piltdown Man, which was definitely a hoax, The Nebraska man, if you want to be really generous, you could say it was a mistake, but come on, from a single tooth, you're going to invent a whole missing link to humans? It's kind of reaching. Lucy, they didn't have very much. And like I said, like I showed you before, the bones on the left here are all they ever found of Lucy. So that's not a whole lot. It's not very complete, is it? So you got to wonder how anxious are they to claim victory when they just don't really have any proof? Well, since these three examples, we have others. We had the Peking man, which was claimed to be a human missing link. It was discovered in 1929 and again in 1937 in China. The Solo Man was discovered in 1931 at the Solo River in Indonesia. The Heidelberg Man, which is discovered in Germany in 1907 and 1921. Originally, it was only based on a single jawbone. And then the Ergaster Man, which was discovered in 1984 in Kenya and in other places. The Java Man, all of these were claimed to be missing links. It was discovered in 1991. And since then, evolutionists who are examining all this stuff have decided they're really all one species. They're not different, and they're not missing links. They're actually real people. They're Homo erectus. They're all people that are found in all these different places in the world. Therefore, they're not missing links. They are people. So, which is more credible? There have been many missing links discovered between apes and humans, proving evolution to be true, or all proposed missing links are proven either hoaxes, mistakes, or humans mistaken for missing links. So let's talk about Neanderthal man. It's sometimes pronounced Neanderthal. It was found in the Neander Valley in Germany first. This was back in 1848. And since then, found some more remains in the Gibraltar area in 1856. And since then, they have found hundreds of remains of Neanderthals. So this is very well documented. They're known to have lived in this huge area, which is pretty significant. Now, they were originally labeled as a primitive human, definitely a missing link from former stages of, quote, human evolution to modern. But if you compare them, these two skulls are at actual scale. The Neanderthal actually had about 150% brain capacity compared to us. That doesn't sound like a primitive human. And when you look at the rest of them, you see that, well, yes, they had a lower cranium, meaning the shape of it. It had a larger brow ridge and a larger nose, shorter forearms, broader hips, and shorter tibia, the leg bones. But it had larger brains, larger and stronger muscles, larger and broader rib cage, and stronger bones. They were superhuman, not subhuman. Really, they weren't primitive at all. They're people. Now, if we saw them today, we would definitely say they look different. They're not somebody that I'd seen before. These are two experiments where they've done reconstructions of Neanderthals and put them in modern clothing. But, you would know that they were people. They were different, but they were still people. So, which is more credible? Neanderthal man was a primitive subhuman, a real missing link between humans and apes and proves evolution, or Neanderthals had more brain than us, stronger bones than us, stronger muscles than us. They were human. Now, speaking of Neanderthals, here's a whole bunch of different recreations of Neanderthals based on their skeletal remains. And you notice the ones on the left look a lot more different than the ones on the right. The ones on the right look like they might be perhaps from Asia or somewhere else. And that brings up the whole question, can you trust scientific illustrations or 3D reconstructions? Reconstructions, they'll take a skull, they'll put these little pegs that will show how thick the tissue is supposed to be on top of that skull at that point, and they'll start to build it up. But really, between one skull and another, you wouldn't actually get the genuine likeness of the person. In fact, here are two reconstructions both made from the exact same skull. This is a skull called the Turkana boy. There's still only one specimen of this skull found, and these are reconstructions based off of that skull. If you saw these two people in a police lineup, you would be able to distinguish between them. They don't look anything like each other, really. They look like they're the same race, perhaps, but that's about it. So you can see that facial reconstruction has huge areas of discretion where they can kind of push things one way or another, depending on how they want it to look. We understand this principle. We know what a difference just a haircut and makeup can make with real living people. Here are some examples of the Northern Virginia magazine. They have this thing called a makeover contest, where they take somebody who looks pretty ordinary and they make them look a lot better just by a haircut and makeup. If you can do that with just haircut and makeup, what can you do when you're actually shaping the features of the face? You could really make a lot of distinctions there. I was a professional illustrator my whole life. I know that you can push things this way and that way when you're making an illustration. And you can basically prove whatever you want to prove by how you do the illustration. Remember, too, that this was all that was actually found of Lucy. This is how they interpreted it as an upright walking ape. Well, since then, they've found more bones that belong to this same species, and they have found that the foot and the ankles are such that this ape was not an upright walker. It was a tree dweller. It used its feet like certain monkeys do today to grab onto limbs and to get itself around in trees. It was not at all like humans. We can see that these kind of reconstructions are open to huge areas of discretion. Now, this is the completed skull of Lucy. The brown parts are the parts that actually they've found. The rest of it is just what they assume the rest of it was. Richard Leakey is a very well-known fossil anthropologist. He's perhaps the most famous fossil anthropologist in the whole world. And he said about this that Lucy's skull is so incomplete that most of it is imagination made of plaster of Paris. He's recognizing that people are taking more than liberties with their interpretations of these finds, and they're building cases built more on imagination than on real fact. So, which one is more credible? Illustrations and facial reconstructions help people see evolution as real as the evolutionists believe it to be, or facial reconstructions are so subject to interpretation that they can be fraudulent. When you just look at bones, it's easy to think that there are a lot of similarities, but it's also easy to miss more important considerations. Let's look at these skull bones. We've got the dog monkey, we've got the lemur, we've got the chimpanzee, we've got the brula monkey, we've got an old gorilla, we've got a female orangutan, and we've got a modern African and an Australian Aboriginal. Humans are the right-hand side. When you look at those, you could say, yeah, that looks like there could have been some progression there, and they're pretty much getting, a continuum until you start looking at important things like brain size. And then you can see, wait a minute, there's a huge difference between those that are apes and those that are humans. It's obvious that they're missing something that's really essential to the question. And they indeed are. The same thing is true when you look at feet. Ape feet are very different than human feet. Yeah, we all have 5 toes, but they're very different kind of toes. And the ankles are also very different. When you look at those things, you can see there's really not a progression. The idea of missing links becomes a lot more problematic for them because there aren't any that way. So, which is more credible? Seeing overall skeletons, it is obvious that man evolved from a common ancestor with apes, or looking at feet, ankles, and brain capacity, the gulf of difference between humans and apes is obvious. Each one of these was claimed to be a human ancestor. Pilopithecus, proconsul, Dryopithecus, Oreopithecus, Ramapithecus, and Paranthropus boisei. But now they're just all admitted to be extinct apes. Even the evolutionists are not claiming that they're missing links. When you look at illustrations like this on supposed missing links, it looks plausible that there was a continuum of creatures up to humans. But then when you start looking at things like the scientific data, regardless of the bodies, apes have brains in a certain size range. And we should also be wary of the illustrations that we see. For instance, Lucy, which is the one on the far left there, could not walk upright, but is shown doing it here in this illustration. And the facial features are sometimes also manipulated so that they look like there's a progression to more and more human. If you compare these with apes that are alive today, you see that they are in the same range. So all of those creatures on the left are definitely in the ape category. And then you can see those that have been found that are humans. Human ergaster or erectus, we talked about him before. There were several finds in different places, all of which are realized now to be the same kind of person. Homo heidelbergensis, Homo neanderthalis, and modern humans. And you can see the brain sizes in all of those is vastly different from that of apes and very similar to each other. The Homo ergaster and erectus was first claimed to be a link, and now it's admitted to be human. Homo heidelbergensis is closely related to Neanderthal, which we've talked about. And Neanderthal had more brain than us and were much stronger and were fully human. Now we have modern humans, which actually have less brain than Neanderthal, but we consider ourselves fully human. All of these are humans and have human and not ape feet and ankles, which is another important thing. In spite of the illustrations on the left, which show them all walking upright, that was difficult for them because of the nature of their feet and their ankles. Now, a more recent claim for a missing link is a creature called Homo habilis. And let's look at the evidence. In the background, we've got a silhouette of Lucy, who we've already talked about for comparison. That light blue silhouette is Lucy. So this creature was even smaller than Lucy. It had a slightly larger brain than Lucy, but still in the ape brain size range. And it had longer arms and shorter legs like tree-dwelling apes. And some evolutionist scientists say it was not capable of walking upright, like it's shown here, and like also Lucy is shown here, who also could not walk upright. It was named Homo as a species without solid evidence, only to make it sound like a human missing link. And some evolutionists believe that it should be reclassified as Australopithecus, meaning ape. It lived at the same time as Homo erectus, therefore, it was not an ancestor. So you can't have it both ways. Any way you look at it, Homo habilis is not a human missing link. So again, we have this repeated pattern. Claims of missing links get lots of publicity. Evolutionists re-examine the data. Key links get reclassified, disproving the original claim. They're quietly removed from the links list, and the old claims persist in modern popular media and in new books. So, which is more credible? Seeing overall skeletons, it is obvious that man evolved from common ancestor with apes. Looking at feet and ankles and brain capacity, the gulf of difference between humans and apes is obvious. If we look at all the different people on Earth, we can see that there's lots of differences. But one thing should be obvious. There's really just one race, the human race. And all those other differences don't really amount to a whole lot. There are critics of creationism. And one of the most vocal critics is a man named Richard Dawkins. He said, "It is absolutely safe to say that if you meet somebody who claims not to believe in evolution, that person is either ignorant, stupid, or insane." Now, in doing this, he's actually committing a fallacy of logic. That fallacy of logic is called ad hominem, which means that when someone attacks the person making the argument instead of addressing the argument. Now, he refuses to debate with creationists because the evidence is against him and he knows it, but he won't give in. There's another fallacy of logic that evolutionists are guilty of, and that's cherry picking, when only evidence that furthers an argument is presented and evidence that would go against the argument is withheld. So here's the question. Is it unscientific to believe in creation? We're going to examine the testimonies of Nobel Prize laureates, not just scientists, but scientists that have made a significant contribution in the world of science. That's why they received the Nobel Prize. Derek Harold Richard Barton, who won the Nobel Prize in 1969 for chemistry, said, "God is truth. There is no incompatibility between science and religion. Both are seeking the same truth. Science shows that God exists." Ilya Prigogine won the Nobel Prize in 1977 for chemistry and physics. He said the statistical probability that organic structures and the most harmonized reactions that typify living organisms would be generated by accident is zero. Richard E. Smalley, who won the Nobel Prize in 1996 for chemistry, said evolution has just been dealt its death blow. After reading Origins of Life by Fazal Rana and Hugh Ross, with my background in chemistry and physics, it is clear that evolution could not have occurred. Ernst Chain said, to postulate that the development and survival of the fittest is entirely a consequence of chance mutations seems to me a hypothesis based on no evidence and irreconcilable with the facts. These classical evolutionary theories are a gross oversimplification of an immensely complex and intricate mass of facts. It amazes me that they are swallowed so uncritically and readily, and for such a long time by so many scientists, without a murmur of protest. John Carew Eccles, won the Nobel Prize in Medicine and Physiology, said, "We come to existence through a divine act. That divine guidance is a theme throughout our life. At our death, the brain goes, but that divine guidance and love continues. Each of us is a unique, conscious being, a divine creation. It is the religious view. It is the only view consistent with all the evidence." Charles Hard Towns, I strongly believe in the existence of God based on intuition, observations, logic, and also scientific knowledge. Harold Urey, remember he was the one that did the Miller-Urey experiment that supposedly proved the development of amino acids, and therefore a lot of people have misrepresented that ever since to mean that evolution has been proven somehow possible. He said, all of us that study the origin of life find that the more we look into it, the more we feel it is too complex to have evolved anywhere. We all believe as an article of faith that life evolved from dead matter on this planet. But just that life's complexity is so great, it is hard for us to imagine that it did. Now, notice he said, we have as an article of faith. They're kind of required to toe the party line in this regard. But that doesn't mean that they actually believe it. Werner Heisenberg won the Nobel Prize in 1932 for physics, and he was the one that discovered quantum mechanics. He says, the first gulp from the glass of natural sciences will make you an atheist, but at the bottom of the glass, God is waiting for you. George Wald shared the Nobel Prize in 1967 in physiology and medicine. At least he's honest for his reasons in adhering to evolution. Here's what he said. When it comes to the origin of life, we have only two possibilities as to how life arose. One is spontaneous generation arising to evolution. The other is a supernatural creative act of God. There is no third possibility. Spontaneous generation was scientifically disproved 100 years ago by Louis Pasteur, Spalzani, Reddy, and others. That leads us scientifically to only one possible conclusion, that life arose as a supernatural creative act of God. I will not accept that philosophically because I do not want to believe in God. Therefore, I choose to believe in that which I know is scientifically impossible, spontaneous generation arising to evolution. Now, at least he's honest about it. He doesn't want to believe in God, so he remains an evolutionist. But the evidence he knows shows it's not viable. Now, we've talked about this principle before, cognitive dissonance. When a person holds a core belief so strong that when they are presented with new evidence that goes against that belief, it is not accepted because protecting the core belief is so important. They will rationalize, ignore, or deny anything that challenges the core belief. People who are trying to understand what's really going on are really being challenged in the education system. Most public education teaches that evolution is a proven scientific fact, even though it is far from that. And creation is never discussed in relation to the data. The media portray evolution as a fact, as the only logical conclusion. And there are lots of scientists who don't believe in evolution, as we have seen, but they can't be open about their opinions because of the huge prejudice against even being open to the idea of creation in academia. You can't get a job teaching in post-secondary education if you're a creationist in most institutions. So anyone who disagrees or points to legitimate science that doesn't fit the evolution narrative is ridiculed as unscientific, illogical, or even stupid. Brainwashing was an art practiced by Nazi Germany almost a century ago with huge, though short-lived success. Joseph Goebbels was Hitler's propaganda minister. Listen to what he admits. If you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. It thus becomes vitally important to repress dissent, for the truth is the mortal enemy of the lie. Now, because of our education system and because of the incessant bombarding from media and every angle, a lot of people are trying to somehow blend their belief that creation took place with evolution. It is so universal and it's so strong. Some Christians even try to reconcile evolution with their faith. But it doesn't work very well because it can't work very well because evolution and creation, if properly understood, are mutually exclusive. Now, Neil deGrasse Tyson is a very vocal evolutionist. Here's what he said. If you want to assert a truth, first make sure it's not just an opinion you desperately want to be true. Now, when he says this, he's meaning to criticize creationists, but that statement could and does apply equally to evolutionists, and increasingly more so as the evidence keeps piling up against evolution. Back to Richard Dawkins, who we talked about earlier. We don't need evidence for evolution. We know it to be true. That's a pretty weak argument. That's actually a religious assertion from Richard Dawkins, not a scientific one. In fact, to say we don't need evidence is anti-science. Evolutionists tend to not want to discuss the evidence that points away from evolution. They just want us to be quiet and accept their beliefs without any critical thinking or discussion. Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. This again is a fallacy of logic, an appeal to ignorance, when the premise is claimed to be true only because it cannot be disproven, or when you ignore the evidence that does disprove it. Well, that doesn't stop people like Bill Nye. Now, keep in mind, Bill Nye is known as Bill Nye the Science Guy, but Bill Nye only has a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering. He doesn't really have a degree in any area of science. He too would be supremely insulted by my statement that evolution is a religion. Here's his statement. Creationism in the US is an embarrassment and a shame, a religious superstition that does real harm to children. Creationism is a symptom of a willful ignorance and an anti-intellectualism that thwarts scientific progress at home and humiliates the US abroad. He really doesn't like to discuss these things with people that know the facts because he's got no defense. Again, this is a fallacy of logic. It's the fallacy of ad hominem when somebody attacks the person making an argument instead of addressing the argument. Now, I hope you understand that I'm not criticizing science as a whole. Modern science has made amazing discoveries, advances that would have been unthinkable only a few decades ago. But some areas of science are based on evolutionary assumptions. And on top of those assumptions, they have built elaborate houses of cards. Of course, these are not traditional houses of cards made with only cards, friction, and gravity. Just like the card creations in this picture, they cheated by using glue. With glue, you can ignore normal architectural principles, principles of friction and gravity. And so these houses of cards are not natural. And those areas of science that are based on evolutionary assumptions, such as astrophysics and geology and paleontology, are having a harder and harder time reconciling new scientific discoveries with their model of evolution of life and an Earth millions or billions of years old, made by only natural processes, because it just doesn't hold up. This is supposed to be the scientific method. Now, because both creation and evolution happened in the past, and we are in the present, it is really impossible to conduct a conclusive experiment. But we can see if the assertions of each side are compatible with the evidence. But that's not what they do. Instead, we have what I would call a corrupted scientific method. Decide what you want to prove. Find a test that will sustain that opinion. Run tests, discard unfavorable data, publish your findings, don't let contrary findings be published, and call all dissenting opinions pseudoscience. That's what's going on in the world of science, and it's really a shame, and it's really hurting science. Now, please understand, science is not the villain. Human nature is the villain. Here's what happens. There are predictions that evolutionists have made based on their evolutionary assumptions. Then new data comes that doesn't fit that model. So they have some sort of complicated rescue argument. And then new data comes out or new evidence comes out that doesn't fit that model. And another complicated rescue argument has to be invented. And then more new data comes out that doesn't fit that model. And another complicated rescue argument has to be invented. So science is getting more and more complex explanations for things that ought to be pretty simple. Remember that we talked about in the past a principle in scientific philosophy called Occam's razor. And it is that simpler explanations are generally better than more complex ones. So it's just more logical to admit that creation and the flood model fits the data better than the evolutionary model. We've shown in this and the preceding videos that evolutionists increasingly have a problem reconciling their theory with the ever-increasing mountain of data. And the chasm to explain why their theory doesn't fit the data grows even wider. Evolution is theoretical. We have tried to be real in our presentations. Evolution gets very emotional. We have tried to be rational in our presentations. Evolution engages in fallacies of logic, where we have tried to be logical in our presentation of creation. Evolution is theory-based. And we're finding and can prove now that creation is data-based. Evolution is unreasonable, and creation is becoming more reasonable. Evolution is actually incredible. Creation is becoming more credible. Evolution is dealing with what is supposed to be, and creation is dealing with what actually is. As we said at the beginning, evolution and creation are both religious beliefs, but which one fits the data best? So let's have our summary. Repeated pattern, evolutionary claims are publicized, disproven, but stay in text and the media. Claiming evolution based only on bones is misleadingly simplistic. Vestigial organs in humans appear to all have purposes and are not vestigial at all. The vestigial tail in human fetal stages is really just the full spine developing first. The Piltdown Man was a deliberate hoax, but accepted as real for 40 years. The Nebraska Man was all based on one single tooth from a pig. Lucy was proclaimed an early human ancestor, now admitted a tree dweller, no ancestor. The Peking, Solo, Heidelberg, Ergaster, and Java Man were all claimed to be missing links, but are really humans. Comparing skulls evolution seems plausible, but brain size shows major differences. Ape feet and ankles are very different from human, and there's no transitional examples. None of the proposed human missing links has withstood scientific examination. Neanderthals had bigger brains, stronger bones and muscles than modern humans. They were not primitive at all. Facial reconstruction and illustration are highly subjective, open to manipulation. And human variation is natural and significant. It does not prove evolution. So that's our presentation today on human missing links. And as with all of our other presentations, we have seen that the evolutionary model doesn't fit the data. It doesn't fit the evidence. And the creation model actually does fit the evidence. When we get to meet the next time, it's a scientific model for how Noah's flood might have taken place. Again, I thank you for joining me. I'm really glad you're doing this with me.